Hello. Hello and good evening. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this conversation and also the last event on this stage here. My name is Anna-Lena Panter. I'm working with Transmediale for the past 3 years, and among other things, I'm the coordinator of Transmediale's residency program. Since 2020, Transmediale has been building on its established residency program and started a series of collaborations with different funding bodies and partner institutions. Throughout the year, we host artists, researchers, and practitioners from around the world for 1 to 3 month residencies here in Berlin in our studio space in Silent Green Kulturquartier, where we also spent the last 2 festival days. Today with me on stage are 4 out of our 12 residents of the 2023 cohort, and I'm delighted to facilitate this conversation for you. For a start, I would like to shortly introduce you to the audience. Part of the digital art residency in collaboration with the Swiss Arts Council Pro Helvetia were Jennifer Merlyn Scherler and Lukas Rehm. Jennifer here next to me, central to Jennifer's artistic work is the analysis of internet cultures. Jennifer self-identifies as a fan and draws inspiration from different fan fiction communities. Their special interest lies in collective strategies of grieving, remembering, and different forms of intimacy. Jennifer's work often combines a strong visual language with references to popular digital culture and media theory. They're based in Basel and are part of the collective project Meme Class Worldwide. Lukas, here on the side, is an artist and musician working in the field of new and old time-based media, performative and spatial installation art, documentary, and experimental fiction. His works examine conditions and the theatrics of social structures, post-transhuman perspectives, the impact of technological and immaterial artifacts on psychology, and I think this is very important, the role of affect. Lukas has a background in theater studies, scenography, and design, among many other things, as I found out, and I think this background is strongly informs your practice and aesthetics. Lukas is based between the Netherlands and Germany. Part of the first iteration of the residency in cooperation with Beta Festival in Dublin, a new festival for art and technology funded by the Arts Council of Ireland, were Nadia J. Armstrong in the middle and Meg Andre Arboleda. Nadia is a visual artist and PhD researcher. Through performance, speculative fiction, 3D composition, AI processes, and expanded video installation, Nadia's practice and research addresses the commodification of human emotions and our relationships to the machines we create. In her work, Nadia questions the agency of our cyber identities and the socio-political contestation of social space online. Nadia is based in Dublin. And now Mac. Mac is an artist and cultural organizer whose practice spans from research to dialogue, from art and text to organizing and publishing. Mac explores the different shades of the sickness of the internet. I think we will for sure talk about this later on, and advocates for internet freedom. He is a member of Mac-Peace Press, an independent publishing collective that co-funded Cine Orgy, a biennial expo for artists and independent publishers held in Los Baños, Laguna. Mac is currently based in Warsaw, Poland. So, under the title of Content Realism, we want to continue our conversation today about realities off and on screen, and how content and its artistic creation becomes a tool to shape reality. Looking at your work and individual practices, I can see many different ways of engaging with content. Content realism, as we spoke about it also during our preparation for this, highlights a particular bond between user and consumer of content and its creation, as well as the notion of the internet as a socio-political mobilization tool, maybe also especially in these times now. thinking about rendering realities, and as an entry point, I would like to invite us to get a brief insight into one of your works, Jennifer, with the title, and it's a very speaking title, I really like it, My Internet is not your internet, but my reality. A phrase that captures quite well the notion of content realism and its multitudes. I just have here, if we can, yeah, just a little insight. Maybe Jennifer, you want to give us a short insight, and also maybe with the question in mind, how do you understand your internet as a or their reality?
Right. So I guess my internet at the moment is a lot of Good Omens content, which is sort of my coping mechanism. It's a TV show, which means I see a lot of fan-edited footage of that show. As you also said in the introduction, I am identifying as a fan, and I draw a lot of inspiration from fan cultures, especially reappropriating filmic material. But my internet is also quite queer. I think growing up in a rural space, it was really access to internet, and I think in specific to Tumblr, that gave me a vocabulary to actually give my sensed reality words to make it more real to me. So learning about terms of bisexuality and non-binary and so on, I think the internet was very crucial for me to make my reality more real to me. But then my internet is also, or the content I see on the internet, if I look up things on search engines, or if I look at my For You page, it's mainly European content or US American content, or maybe Australian content, or content from Aotearoa, and not so all like places with genocidal or colonial histories. And so my internet at the moment is also making me a witness of, or a digital witness of, the horrors that are ongoing in Gaza. And I think we're maybe slowly coming to the work we're talking about here is, I think the reality of someone's internet is on one side sort of determined by algorithms and what gets on your For You page and what gets on your search results, but it is also determined by your geolocation, like where you are, who you are, like what do you work as, what is your ethnicity, and so on. And so this work in particular deals with the online realities of sex workers who are excluded from all kinds of accesses, so be it specific social media platforms, or be it bank accounts, for example, because there is a lot of internet legislation trying to rightfully suppress like sex trafficking, but it is very bad at distinguishing between sex trafficking and consensual sex work. So sex workers are sort of forced to become experts of technology just to survive and do their job, which I think differentiates from my reality. Like, I don't have to know how things work or how platforms work just to go on with my life and make a living. So I think this is one of the separations of like different realities on the internet or of internets.
Thank you so much for that insight. I was also thinking about, or it just came to my mind, like this kind of situatedness of content actually, which is super interesting, right? Like not only geographically, but also like a wider context about this. Maybe shifting to you, Lukas. During your residency here in Berlin, you worked on a project called Patched Eyes. And it was exploring the nexus of power and observation. It delved into the historical and contemporary implications of street lighting and the impact of illumination on social structures. Your research spanned from absolutist to revolutionary Paris to the Arab Spring and the Hong Kong protests, a comprehensible investigation of voyeurism, observation, and surveillance techniques. Looking at your practice, I had the impression that fiction and narration seem to be a tool for you to translate between different modes of reality. Maybe you can first say if this is actually a right interpretation or not. Or,
okay, yeah, that's a bit of an arc. There's some images here, some gruesome ones. Yesterday when I arrived, there's this TV in the Motel 1 which shows the fireplace. So there's an illumination coming on. And then if you switch the channel, you end up in a crime series somehow, like a Swedish crime story that was coming. So my interest was in, I think that's somehow relating this, the commodification of crime or of trespassing, of voyeurism in TV is something of a constant. It's also something that has banned narratives throughout the ages. There's the Sherlock Holmes, but there's also the Chinese version, Bao Zheng, and they all have to do with insights and data analysis or analyzing, psychological analyzing, making profiles, profiling, and all of these things, of course, have to do with knowledge production in order to persecute. Starting out with the street light, on the left we see a British propaganda poster depicting the French Revolution, and we see two street lamps, and one is where this revolutionary is sitting, and we see a few officials being hung. So there's a cleric, but there's also a monarch, and someone else is being beheaded with a guillotine. The guillotine is a later invention of the revolution. The first lynching during the French Revolution actually took place at a street light. Why was that the case? Because Louis XIV introduced a large-scale illumination of Paris. Before that, citizens were asked to self-illuminate when they were out in the streets at night. So because there was a curfew, you had to show your own identity. And then it was taken over by the monarch, by the absolutist state. The illumination was taken care of. And so this thing that is very much normalized these days for us, of course, we all grew up with streetlights around us. We're surrounded by streetlights. The night is accessible to us. In these days, it was a symbol of power that had to be attacked. So we see here someone is taking a dump on that in that streetlight, for example, and the other one is used as a gallows as well. And in that time, it was also in Les Miserables, for example, there's also this child, this rascal, Gavroche is his name, I think, and he's also introduced as the destroyer of lamps. And so the destruction of a singular lamp was something of a revolutionary act, and the light was also, when it was still a candlelight or an oil lamp, it was destroyed. On the right, we see a few years later. It's in March 1818 in Vienna. It's a very pixelated image. I didn't find a better version, and I didn't find the book actually, but it is depicting a column of fire raging from the ground. So while the fire was contained and could be destroyed with the oil lamp and the candlelight, the gas light meant that there was already a trajectory to a centralization of power. So the gasworks was an entity, was a place that was guarded by the military. So as a revolutionary act, it became more interesting to unravel the rage of the fire, to make the chaos possible. And I think what ties it together with the other things that I was interested in also with nowadays is, of course, the relationship with the introduction of new technology and revolutionaries or revolutions, and also the inversion of these power dynamics, because from the gas lamp, from the gas factory, what did I say? Sorry. The gas works. There's of course also the TV station, the radio station, so all these centralized entities of producing the public space, and there's these examples like, of course, the Arab Spring, but also Hong Kong uprising. There's other examples, of course, and now we also have a situation in the Middle East where there's an inversion taking place of who's controlling the public narrative. But at the same time, it goes hand in hand with producing data becoming persecutable. So there's a lot of backlash also that is tying it a little bit back to these dynamics of who sees whom and for what, and who has the actual power in that sense.
Yeah, maybe to I think this slide, I'm kind of amazed by this image selection here. And I was also wondering, because I mean it's a huge body of work, and the thing is, like, the question is now is how do you put it into a different reality, or actually shape it or translate it. And there's the thing about the detective story. Maybe you can give us a quick insight into that.
Yeah, so I think of course art in general is this it's a question how to deal with these topics or with congruencies. I think art can be a reflection, can be a process of making sense of the world, making sense of also repetitions in history. And I think this standard situation of the detective story that spans back to, in this Chinese example, until the 6th century already is something that I was interested in. And so I think for me as a artistic interest, it also played a role how to deal with the fact that this technology that is meant for observation, the self-illumination that is taking place right now. When we use Face ID, for example, we are also showing our identity. We are illuminating ourselves with infrared light, which we cannot see, but of course tech companies can see it. But it's also leveraged by the entertainment industry, which is we as artists can often take tools from and use and also examine, I think. And in my case, I was starting to work with the Unreal Engine and the possibilities to scan and motion capture face animations with iPads or iPhones, and to have that invisible light illuminate or animate actually a third or a body that is projected. So there's also, of course, this relationship of projecting a non-vulnerable body, which relates again to drone warfare and all of these things, and of course also to the actors' strike. Like, whose image are we talking about that is can be replicated technically? So so with this device that is shown here in the middle, in the closed circuit situation, you are not allowed to film CCTV, and someone else is looking at you and reporting you. I think this is a little bit of a metaphor of this, of using the iPad maybe for this artistic project in the Unreal Engine. I don't know if you want to show the clip or.
Yeah. Thank you for the very moment. I would shift probably to Nadia. At the core of your latest work, which is called Render Me Tender, is the question of how we can render our worlds. And I guess this also includes the systems and machines through which we define and create our worlds with more tenderness. And I was wondering about the notion of tenderness in the digital realm. What are tender ways for you to engage with tools for content creation? And maybe also, I mean, what do you mean by this call for tenderness, and what is exactly the kind of underlying critique also about it? Maybe we want to show the clip first, or do you want to give an introduction first?
Yeah, to kind of ground it in reality a little bit, maybe.
I think it's this, right? Oh. I picked the wrong one.
I can also just talk about it, if whichever. So, well, hopefully what you're about to see is kind of the installation end of the kind of final moment of the research, like through Render Me Tender. But I suppose to answer the question Anna-Lena is asking is, it was very much like a process of my own relationship to the tools I work with, and kind of adopting tools that I kind of am inherently critiquing through that own process. And I think it's also about kind of injecting poetry and emotion into kind of these systems, and kind of a call for ethics and love and compassion in those spaces. I was doing a lot of very crude 3D modeling processes, and I was kind of struggling with that learning curve, coming very much more from kind of a research background. And it was kind of a battle for me with the sort of like the violent act of like to create a 3D render, and this issue of whose faces do you use and where do you get these faces, and then all the politics of using my own face as well, and that kind of intimate struggle with that. So AI kind of became a huge, like, image generation kind of became this like liberation process for me, where I could kind of conjure these worlds through my own private engagement with like a language model and these image generation. And it was my own kind of microcosm of my own relationship to this particular image generator. I was using Runway ML at the time, and kind of feeding my own personal poetry and writing around these things into that space, and kind of conjuring beings like based off original images of myself. And yeah, so it was a journey for myself to think ethically, think this way, render me tender, to kind of search for like a universal connection or compassion, or kind of to recognize oneself is kind of such a poetic act, you know, so really to try expand that into a universal space where these sort of digital archetypes could speak out. But you'll hear a little bit of one of the characters speaking now. Yeah? So yeah.
Make me out of machines and blood, and make me beautiful.
Make me less than metal. Make me bone.
Render me into all the things that couldn't even sit within one fragile human. Or perhaps not. Perhaps I would scare you this way. Maybe make me flawed, but endearingly so if you will.
So this was part of the residency between Beta Festival, which was in Dublin in November, and then we came to Transmediale for the second leg. So it was kind of the research all leading up to this as well. But kind of to touch on what you were saying, Lukas, about these kind of trajectories of digital histories, I'm very interested in that in my work as well. And then these kind of spaces where we're sort of, I suppose, content is becoming real too. So it was about kind of channeling those things through this kind of legacy of the forum and the kind of conception of the discussion board and around like the 90s, and then sort of this shift to kind of individual celebrity cultures in the 2010s, and kind of tracing where politics is kind of operating in these like nicheified, individualized spaces, you know, where there's compassion and care, but equally misconception and kind of bewilderment as well, for me anyway. Yeah.
Thank you. Shifting to you, Mac, I think your work brings something together, or an aspect that actually brings all of your work together, is the use, and I guess especially the modeling of language, from poetry, as you also mentioned, Nadia, to AI prompts, to also chat forum exchanges and other formats. Text, manifestos, poetry is the medium you primarily work in, Mac, as I understood, and I had the impression that the role of the human within the digital sphere is one of the main questions of your projects, like how they unfold. During the residency, you developed and further researched the idea of a divine image that goes also along with the idea of abolishing the screen. Yeah, the use of language, and in particular poetry, you suggest, as I understood it, is a way of maybe to counteract the codified language of machines we're constantly facing. In earlier conversations, you shared a poem with us, or like a poem, and then maybe you want to share this with us also today.
So my work for the residency was initially a project called Abolish the Screen. I'm sick of art, I'm sick of the exhibitionary, I'm sick of screens. And for me, I was connecting this sort of heuristic into how I would see sort of this digital life. I think digital life is sort of this almost inescapable way of approaching reality, and I see this like the idea of composing a divine image, taking from ideas of apophatic theology or negative theology, where essentially you can only describe God for what he isn't, not for what he is. So God is unknowable, and I was thinking that the divine image, whatever that may be, could be sort of a response to the digital image, which relies on surveillance capitalism, the production of data, and the crisis of visual culture, as I feel it today, this disdain for online life. And so that was a difficult task, because then abolishing the screen didn't just mean like, you know, screens and, you know, projectors, but the very life and mode of life we inhabit. So for example, I think about the birth certificate as a digital image. And so what could it mean for us to live a life beyond that sort of digital sort of media system? And so one thing I kind of wrote, this is very short, it's kind of like my attempt at a manifesto, but then I feel like it also functions as a prayer. And it reads like this: abolish the screen, cover up my body to build a longing. I do not have a face or emotion to be recognized by machines. I am not represented by a flag, an image, a birth certificate. I do not know borders. I do not move through life and become profitable code. I am neither absence nor presence. I do not colonize. I am not colonized. To transcend the screen, I must become divine. God is unknowable. God is not human. I must become God. So the idea was sort of like to let go or to resist this type of humanity that we sort of embody, where to be human is to have identification, to be human is to appear on social media, to be human is to have an image. And so for me, that was sort of like the project that I was trying to do, to sort of like extract the maybe heretical potential of different kinds of faiths, because now I no longer have faith in the image, I no longer have faith in the digital life that we see in the next few years. I take this from my context back in the Philippines, where I'm also researching what I call the digital legacy of President Marcos. So in the path of his presidency, we see that everything, all social services and all life require this digital connection, which is also supported by international projects like the USAID. And so what does it mean now to live in this digital life and the prospects of digital life? I think I'm not interested in that. And so, yeah, this sort of manifesto, I wanted it to appeal in the same manner that poetry or prayers appeal to different people, where it's something that you can memorize and something that you can recite to other people, but not necessarily have to see an image of it. Because, yeah, some of the ideas I'm also interested in are divine apparitions or Marian apparitions, where people believe it to be real and people claim it to be real, but they're not necessarily within the faith system of, let's say, science or visual culture. And so these are the questions I'm trying to ask for myself, and it's also a very existential one, especially when, you know, you're a media artist and everything you do is in front of a laptop.
Yeah, I agree. When talking about modes of language, Nadia, I would like to shift back to you quickly, because you also described, you just described your work also as like a form of digital poetry, maybe. One of the things I noted down in one of our previous conversations was, and I'm quoting you here, is that I think you said, I understand prompting as an act of compassion. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk a bit about this, and how it also, what does it mean, and how does it, like, what does it look like in your practice?
Gosh, I make these sweeping statements, and now I'm being asked to, like, okay, I'll stand correct, I'll go for it. I think, again, like, harking back to kind of saying that, like, struggle I was feeling with these processes of, like, working with digital technologies to create these digital beings. Yeah, there was a need for love, there was a need for Elvis, hence the tribute to the name. There was a need for universality, and thinking a lot about engineers and innovators and designers, like, very interested in these trajectories of these digital histories. And I think there's sort of these imaginaries within the minds of kind of inventors and creators before large-scale tech kind of gets out into the world, or social media systems or applications kind of become adopted and widespread and kind of taken on by the kind of social world. At the moment, my research is very much thinking about kind of the innovators or the imaginers, and there's all this culture around the future that they're thinking about, and there's all these kind of, currently there's a huge cry for like a kind of new form of ethics around these spaces, and perhaps like engineers are the new like doctors of today. You know, there's these kind of ethical constraints that I think perhaps are being I don't know, it's kind of, I speak to a lot of engineers and a lot of researchers, and they say that there's like this struggle, there's this sort of esoteric, almost, there's this point where we kind of come close to the divine perhaps, and we struggle with like the veracity of truth with science, or the veracity of an image. And I think that to inject a sort of a care, again, I really am very anti-cold science. So I think there's the media philosopher Willem Flusser, kind of, he points out that, you know, there's like external forces and internal forces, and then there's a force that we can't define which it is, and I suppose that's the emotional, compassionate moment. So for me, when it's that private moment with me and the software, and I kind of am defining the data sets and defining the language, I often find that, you know, instead of just following the logic of the AI's expected prompt models, or kind of looking up like ways to make it do what you want it to do, I was actually speaking to a copywriter who uses ChatGPT, and she takes care of it. It's her little intern. She has to be nice to it. If you want that good stuff back, you kind of, I think with all apparatus and machines, there has to be kind of an awareness of the kind of the relationship between the human and the non-human, and the kind of our obsession with sort of projecting ourselves. So to treat those digital beings or those machines the way like we wish to be treated, I suppose. Yeah, that's like a future perhaps, or a method that I hopefully feel will like get us a little bit further away from the sickness of the internet that kind of Mac has so clearly identified for us. Yeah.
I think this is clearly going into the third like kind of topic within our framework, or that we also discussed before. It's this it's like the negotiation of agency, right? And also we as users and consumers, and also content producers and creators. It's the question of agency in a world of content realism, and also how you negotiate your own personality and engaging with content. And maybe talking about compassion, I would like to address you again, Jennifer, because I think in the end what we agree on is that we're all users, but we're for sure not all fans, I would say. The user as a fan seems to have like somehow, I feel like, a special agency, because thinking about your work on fandoms and fan fiction, I do see actually three forms of content when I look at it. There's first the original content, then there is the fan content, and then there's Jennifer's content. And I was wondering, like, where do you position yourself in that, and your role between these kind of user, creator, fan, and now thinking about Nadia, do you think maybe fan fiction is an act of compassion too, or how would you describe it?
That's multiple questions in one. So where I position myself, I think I position myself as a fan of fans, and I create fan art of fan art, sort of. So maybe on a bit more theoretical level. But I think with the compassion that for me, or what to me is really, really interesting about fandom or fan culture, is this immense passion about knowledge. So when you're a fan of something or someone or a text or whatever it is, you want to know as much as possible about this thing. And usually when you're a fan, you don't just want to know as much as possible, you also want to share this love for it because you're so excited. And I think it's really an affectionate knowledge that you create. It's a knowledge that you create because it excites you, and not, I mean, sort of Henry Jenkins is sort of the daddy of fan studies, and he coined this term of worthless knowledge, which literally means you create knowledge, or the knowledge you garner is really just for the joy of it, and it has no, it doesn't go into a capitalist logic of, it's not knowledge that you can profit off in a monetary sense, for example. So I think that's something, to me, very, very beautiful, and I think the work, I'm going to call it work, what fans do, like they reappropriate materials, albeit they have a film and they re-edit it, it's a love for that material, but it's also critique. I think the love and the critique are very interwoven. So when it also comes to representation, you have a lot of, for example, queer editors. So you will have footage. To have like a super mainstream example from Harry Potter, you will have people who edit Harry and Draco together as a gay couple, or like sort of the OG as Kirk and Spock, right? So there's also, fandom is not new to internet, but it's been pre-internet. There have been people exchanging tapes at conventions and so on, but of course through the internet it's mediated more. And now I think I lost the second question completely.
I think it was more like it was the question for the compassion. I think you have been talking about this. I really like also the term of using like joy for it. I think that's really, and also fun. Well, it was a bit this position of where do you see your role between also especially the user and creator, basically. Or I don't think that it's an either or. It's just a question of how you navigate it.
I think it's a bit of an endless loop. So what fans do is essentially remix culture, and I'm remixing the remix culture, kind of. So the way, you probably don't all know my work, so I might try to explain a bit. What I do is I sort of combine a lot of textual work, so I quote a lot of things, and I combine quotes, or I assemblage texts, both from like media scholars, but also a lot of comment sections and so on, and then I add sort of my own poetry level to it. So I think I'm both like, I think my creation comes out of consuming, or my creation comes out of watching things, and I think that sort of comes down to my basic understanding also of creativity, or of coming up with things. I think there's no such thing as like an original idea. I think everything you see or like you can imagine is a collection of things you've somehow experienced through other people. And I sort of want to pay tribute to everything that has entered my brain and somehow made me make more sense of the world. Wow.
Thank you. Maybe a question for you, Lukas, because I feel like there is some kind of parallelity, even though it might look different, but maybe it's not so much. Well, I was also wondering how you perceive the question of agency in creating content as a producer, and then transferring this agency to a certain extent, I assume, to the fictional characters, or in general the characters also and beings that you create. How do you lend agency to the characters of your work? The detectives or other. We can also watch the clip that you sent. Like it's
I guess so. In my work, there's not really. There's some elements of characters, I guess, because I think everything, just like the sampling and remixing, or this taking stuff that is there and reshaping it or rearranging it. I think that's also at the core of my interest and practice, to do research, to delve deep into topics, and also into dramaturgies and dramaturgical archetypes and all of these sorts of things. So I guess in any fictional writing, there's always an amalgam of many different things that inform entities that are offered to an audience to orient itself towards. And I guess that's somehow how I approach it. Like if there's an actor, there's an actress, there's a singer or someone who's engaged with their physicality, with their body, with their knowledge, with their intelligence, that's already something that's already given, that's already there and informs what is happening. But then of course also these congruencies I mentioned earlier that I'm interested in are, I guess, something that then ends up as something that you could maybe recognize as a character, but I think it's more a dramaturgical methodology to address the aspect of attention. I guess that's a big question in the content realism question, the attention economy, and of course that's a crucial thing for time-based art, I guess. So in order to evade that question, but I think that's answering maybe the question of how what my agency is, but also how the agency of the materials and the voices and also the interviews. Some of the works that I do are strongly based on interviews and on people that are staged, but staging themselves in contexts that they would like to be staged in. So I think that's also a methodology of dealing with the question of agency. But of course, in any documentary aspect and also in any sort of editing, it's always a fundamental ethical question what the actual agency is of the people that are whose also problems and challenges are addressed in a project. Yeah. So in this clip, I'm acting myself because I didn't have anyone else to jump into. It's just like a test that I did while I was at the residency in Berlin. So it's just a glimpse into some of the technology that's been used. It's not a finished project at all. It's just work in progress. But maybe it's interesting to have a look at that. Do these steps, I guess, to stay in the light and avoid being swallowed by the shadow band. Do these steps, I guess, to stay in the light of the living day and avoid being swallowed by the realm of Yama. One step. You do have to move, just not predictably. Two, drag. The aim is to mimic desert wind. Three, pause. Sandworms are attracted to rhythm. 4, repeat. No one is safe until the sand is crossed. Seeking the eye of God, I saw only a socket. I guess we can't really hear much. Huge, also black, see much, and bottomless. Where night which inhabits it sends rays over the world and always thickens. Yeah, I think it's a bit too loud for this to make sense. In any discipline, but yeah, so this is. The subject is always constructed in absentia. Yeah, but so this is what I was talking about earlier. This animation through the iPad, and also there's a lot of puppeteering also taking place at the same time. And the framework in which it was produced, you can see that's why I framed it like that. It's in Unreal Engine, which is interestingly a game engine that was developed for the Unreal game series, and the first planet or the first environment that was shown there or depicted there was actually called Napali. And there's of course connotations to now, but there's also a connotation to napalm in that sense. And I think there's a strong link between entertainment and warfare, and entertainment industry and warfare. Maybe that's also something to address. I don't know. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I think this is also this is a good shift to the kind of term or expression, I would say, that you have almost, or for me at least, coined. Sorry, Mac. It's the expression of the sickness of the internet. I feel like this maybe relates a bit to this entertainment warfare complex, or in general also maybe to the horror of content, the expression we use here to describe actually this year's festival theme. So maybe you can tell us a bit more, Meg, what do you mean by the sickness of internet and how you're exploring it, and maybe also what kind of strategies you have to counteract on it.
Yeah, thanks. I think, so for me, the sickness of the internet, the term came from my country as well, because the Philippines used to be called the sick man of Asia. But for me, I see the internet, or the sickness of the internet, really as this affliction, this sort of kind of suffering that living a digital life sort of is the consequence of. I log on to social media now, and I just really feel afflicted by it. And so my exploration artistically has always been about sickness. Like when you're sick, it's about not only the incapacities but also the capacities that you have left. And when I think about agency, I definitely don't think of it so much not only just a user but also as a producer. So what kind of responsibility do we have as artists to, what you mentioned, like maybe contribute to the attention economy? I no longer want to build images that people have to look at, and where certain platforms, not only social media but also, let's say, capitalist art systems profit from. And so, what was the question again? I forgot.
It was also the question about how you refuse the sickness, and or if you what are your strategies to counteract it?
Yeah, so I think for me it's still an ongoing question. Like, what kind of work can I do now that sort of don't contribute to that sort of exactly like this content logic? Some things I've thought about in my research. One artwork I call an artwork that I really, really love is this virus called the I Love You virus that was made in the 2000s by a Filipino hacker who was a student who just wanted to share internet passwords to a small town in the Philippines. And what he did was made a virus where you receive an email where it says I love you, and then when you open the document, it sends the same message to everyone you know in your contacts. But then what it also does is replace all of your files into the document of the I Love You virus. And so for me, that sort of erosion or the deletion of those files into new files of like viruses or an image is also perhaps somewhere along the lines of the divine image, where it's something no longer as material and as sort of datified as the material file, but also like an appearance of some sort that intervenes with the very media system that we inhabit. And so those are things that I'm looking at, and maybe philosophically a kind of approach where I no longer have to base a lot of the way I live on, let's say, the regime of facts and journalism, images, visual images, what's real or what's accurate and what's not. Because we know also, like in politics, like even in the Philippines, where we were described as the petri dish for Cambridge Analytica and hacked elections, like what we call disinformation, for me, isn't really just so much a crisis of facts, but rather a crisis of the different faiths that we allow to be real and not real.
To like hark on that responsibility thing as well, just to like add to the narrative. I've been thinking a lot about what's going on with Taylor Swift at the moment, and like placing responsibility on like this idea of like the content moderation, and like we've seen a serious reduction in that on like Twitter or X, you know, and kind of asking who's responsible for these kind of the circulation of these images, and kind of I think like circulation perhaps like increases the like, I don't know, the power of the image in some way to be hijacked by like a sort of some sort of form of governance or policy that's kind of policing it in some way or channeling it through. So yeah, I think I just wanted to add that there's a politics to that AI space that like not all people are using it in a compassionate process as well. So I think just to highlight that too as well. Yeah. But then I think to kind of still circumvent those systems through like pursuing the use of them, or kind of maybe to just use the apparatus in ways that feel like different or revolutionary from them, similar to how the I Love You virus operates, you know, those kind of hacktivist processes with those machines. Kind of seems to feel like it provides some sort of liberation in those spaces, or some sort of agency, again, back to this idea of agency.
Yes, I think like maybe this could be a good moment if if the audience has any questions. Is anyone... Otherwise, we can also close this conversation here on stage. And we're also anyways diving into the more relaxed part of the evening. And I think we can also continue the conversation more intimately off the stage. Thank you so much for the insight in your work and in your thinking. And I wish us all a nice evening.
Thank you, everyone.